Antarctica is one of the Earth's 7 continents and holds the honor of being the least populous continent, despite placing 5th overall in size, ahead of Europe and Australia respectively. Obviously, Antarctica's at-max 4-digit population count is due to the harsh polar desert environment of the continent, as much of Antarctica's landmass is covered by the Antarctic ice sheet, which is on average over a mile thick. Temperatures in Antarctica seldom reach above freezing, and interestingly, the continent is home to 70% of the world's freshwater reserves, hidden away in huge subglacial fossil lakes. Also home to our planet's South Pole, the unforgiving frozen tundra of Antarctica was not officially discovered by people until the 1800s, as the rough waters of the Antarctic Ocean and the freezing cold temperatures repelled all but the most ambitious of the European exploration expeditions of the time. One of the most infamous stretches of Antarctic waters is the Drake Passage, which separates the southern tip of South America from Antarctica, and the Drake Passage has garnered an infamous reputation for its choppy, often stormy, freezing waters, which measure at an average temperature of 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Some historians believe that the first humans to set foot in Antarctica were survivors from a shipwreck that took place in the Drake Passage in 1819, when a Spanish Navy ship, the San Telmo, who was bringing reinforcements for their troops fighting in the Peruvian War of Independence, which ultimately sank while crossing through the Drake Passage, which ultimately cost all 644 men aboard their lives. In the years following, other explorers would find remnants of the wreckage of the San Telmo on the mainland of Antarctica, suggesting that some of the shipwreck's initial survivors may have reached the Antarctic mainland. And while ships have come a long way since 1819, the frigid Antarctic waters that claim the San Telmo are still infamously unpredictable and dangerous to all who dare venture their vessels into them. On November 15th, 2022, an Antarctic exploration cruise company, Quark Expeditions, disembarked its tourist passengers from their mothership, the World Explorer, near Cape Lookout on Elephant Island, loading them aboard smaller Zodiac inflatable boats to allow for the tourists to go further inland to see the massive, magnificent glacial ice up close for themselves. However, as those of you who have watched my video about the tragic, deadly rockslide in Capitolio, Brazil are likely aware, observing these gargantuan, constantly shifting glaciers up close carries some risks, as the glacial ice poses the constant threat of sudden collapse. Besides the risk of being struck by one of these huge, crumbling chunks of ice, another danger posed by these sudden collapses is the huge waves created by the sudden displacement of large quantities of water, with an extreme example of this being the over 1,720-foot mega tsunami wave I covered in a previous video on the channel if you'd like to check that out. Anyways, as the tourists aboard the Quark Expedition Zodiac boats explored the inland waters, a large chunk of the glacier overhanging the water, approximately a quarter-mile away or so from them, broke loose, causing a large displacement wave to roll towards the Zodiac boats. As they were struck by the wave, one of the Zodiacs was caught within the break of the wave and subsequently flipped over, casting all 6 of its occupants into the ice-cold waters. Due to the extreme cold of the water, all 6 people in the water immediately went into hypothermic shock, with one American woman being forced to endure the freezing waters while trapped underneath the flipped Zodiac boat, drawing her breath from the air bubble created underneath it. She would ultimately survive the ordeal. However, unfortunately, her husband would not, as he and another of the 6 passengers aboard the flipped Zodiac, also American in nationality, would succumb to the freezing waters before they could be rescued. In the aftermath of the incident, it was noted that Zodiac boat overturning incidents are extremely rare, as they are renowned for their sturdiness and will stay afloat even if one of the inflatable ballasts is punctured, hence why they're popular with police and explorers. Just a few weeks later, on Tuesday, November 29th, 2022, an Antarctic tourist cruise ship with 378 passengers aboard, the Viking Polaris, was making a return trip to port in Argentina after having spent the preceding several days in Antarctica. The previous few days had not been without incident for the Viking Polaris, as some passengers aboard the Polaris had been narrowly spared a similar fate as the American tourists from the previous incident earlier in the video, as one American was injured when one of the Polaris's Zodiac boats suffered a keel bladder failure near Demoy Point. As the Polaris was making its return to port across the reportedly more choppy than usual waters of the Drake Passage, suddenly the passengers aboard the craft were violently tossed about the ship's cabin as the Polaris was slammed by a massive rogue wave. The rapid change in the ship's momentum caused everything that was not held down firmly inside the ship to catapult about its interior, as frigid seawater from the huge wave cascaded its way through the many broken windows from the force of the wave's impact, as some passengers would describe the experience as akin to the ship suddenly slamming into a brick wall, with many of the passengers aboard initially suspecting that the ship had struck an iceberg. One passenger aboard the Polaris, a 62-year-old American woman named Sherry Xiaonong Zhu, was inside her cabin with her husband at the time of the wave's impact and was suddenly impaled by the glass from her cabin's window as the immense force of the wave caused the glass to break and implode into the cabin. Sherry would mark the sole fatality of the incident, as the Polaris was able to successfully return to port in Argentina without further incident or injury. Just a few short days later, on December 1st, 2022, the Antarctic expedition vessel Planicus, which is owned by a Dutch expedition company, Oceanwide Expeditions, was en route between destinations in Antarctic waters when an American passenger aboard the vessel fell overboard, plunging into the icy Antarctic waters below. The fall fortunately did not go unnoticed, and procedures for extracting them from the water were immediately enacted. Despite rescuers' best efforts reaching the passenger in just a matter of minutes, by the time they managed to extract them from the frigid waters, the American was unresponsive. Resuscitation efforts were attempted, and the passenger was warmed. However, these efforts were for naught, as they were simply too late, as the American was pronounced dead not long after being removed from the water, marking the final deadly incident in Antarctic waters in 2022, and the 4th American tourist fatality over the stretch of just 16 days. However, the victims of these tragic incidents certainly were not the last lives that will be claimed by the icy depths of the Southern Ocean. Thank you all for watching.